Hello, everyone, and welcome to another very exciting Truth in Health podcast. My name is Chip Paul, and I'll be your navigator, your host, your shepherd, your guide through this exciting conversation that we're going to have with Mr. Jon Roth. So today in Truth in Health, we're expanding the conversation about what it really means to be well. We've talked a lot about toxic load, environmental toxins, inflammatory food, chronic stress, but there's another form of stress that quietly impacts families every single day, and that is financial pressure. Financial insecurity is one of the leading contributors to stress in the home. It affects marriages, parenting, mental clarity, work performance, and even physical health outcomes. When families are overwhelmed by debt, underinsured, or simply lacking a clear financial strategy, that stress doesn't stay on paper. It shows up right here in the body. That's why I'm excited to welcome Jon Roth to the show. Jon works in financial planning and income protection, but what he really does is help families build clarity and long-term stability. Through foundational concepts like the Rule of 72, debt stacking strategies, income protection awareness, and defining a financial independence number, he equips people with practical tools to reduce stress and take control of their future. Because true health isn't just physical, it's emotional, it's relational, and it's financial. Jon has a gift for explaining complex financial ideas in a way that's clear, relatable, and even enjoyable and fun. So you'll see as we get into this today. Jon, welcome to Truth in Health. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate being here. So thanks for having me out.
Absolutely. And so Jon is with Primerica, which we'll be talking about, I'm sure, in depth, and he will let us know all about that. But Jon, we're very glad to have you here today. So let's just dive right in with the first question. And how does mindset really influence financial decisions? And what are some practical tools for that mindset for couples?
Yep. All right. So mindset, I don't want to say is everything, but it is a lot. And we've all heard the saying in America, hey, what's the number one leading cause of divorce, right? And when I ask most people that, they answer, oh, it's finances, right? Well, the real answer is it's actually marriage followed closely by finances, right? So how does mindset affect things? So again, it's a lot. And what I would say is the first thing to really think about is you need to determine what type of individual you are. And if you're married, you really need to identify what type of individual your spouse is. So in all my years of doing this, I would say I've kind of identified there's three different types of people, okay? There are spenders, there are savers, and there are investors. And each type of individual brings their strengths and their kind of weaknesses, if you will, to the relationship. So the great thing about the spenders is that they live in the moment. They understand that tomorrow is not guaranteed, but kind of the drawback is they're one non-fatal catastrophe away from a financial hardship, right? Okay. That's me, okay? I have my problem, right? Coffee is my problem, okay? I'm a spender. We'll go out, we'll have a relationship, we'll build a relationship over coffee any day of the week. Okay, now my wife, on the other hand, she's a saver, okay? I don't want to say that she's like a dragon that sits on her pile of gold, but she's like a dragon that likes to sit on her pile of gold, put it under the mattress, right? And she's really, really good with saving money, putting money back. She has that discipline, okay? The drawback, though, is that there's this thing called inflation. If you ever talk to your father, your grandparent, your great-great-grandparent, they'll tell you about how much an hour of tuition was. They'll tell you about how much a gallon of gas was, so on and so forth. And so we have to be mindful of that. And the third person is the investor. The great thing about the investor, like the saver, is they're really disciplined at putting money back. The drawback to the investor is that oftentimes we get so caught up in tomorrow that we forget to live today. And so I'm definitely kind of those into Stacy's the middle. So one thing that we did at the beginning to really help us with our mindset was, number one, we did a budget. It's gross. No one likes the B word. No one likes to make a budget, but it really helped us early on in our marriage. And then the second thing that we did within our budget, this is kind of our secret sauce, if you will, that helped with our mindset, was that we understood who we were, the pros and cons of that, but we also had a fun budget. And that fund budget allowed us to have a certain number of dollars each month that either one of us could spend without any questions asked. Anything over that amount, we'd go talk to each other. And so it's really just getting on the same wavelength and understanding the strength that you bring to your marriage or relationship, and sharing a vision moving forward. So that's kind of how I would approach the mindset. And again, what you bring about, or what you think about, you bring about, right? The age-old saying, okay, you don't want to have stinking thinking. So.
Well, and that's really, knowledge and education to me is always a way to, let's say, diffuse, situations. And if I don't know I'm a spender and I don't know my wife is a saver, that's going to cause a lot of stress in my relationship. So just identifying that and identifying those personality traits, I would think would be very de-stressing for a relationship.
Yeah, and opposites attract, right? That's kind of how we're wired, right? You've got strengths and weaknesses on your end, right? The bride's got her strengths and weaknesses, right? And that's what makes it a beautiful relationship. So.
Yeah, cool. No, that's neat. Very good concept. So what is the rule of 72, and what would be the concept of, financial independence?
Okay, so financial independence, let's start there and work into the rule of 72. Okay. Financial independence is basically this concept that at some point we get to go to work because we want to, not because we have to. And so what everyone needs to realize is we all have this imaginary number floating around above our heads. Okay. And what that number is that is the number that you and your spouse need to have in your savings and investments, so that way you don't have to worry about running out of money once you retire or slow down. Because in today's day and age, no one's going to stop working. We all like to slow down though, right? So the way we figure out what that number is we have to ask ourselves two questions. Is number one, we have to figure out, when do we want to slow down, or when do we want to retire? And number two, if we were that age right now, how much income would we want on either a monthly basis or an annual basis to have the type of lifestyle that we want to have? And once we determine those two variables, then we can figure out what this number is up here. So then that way we can reverse engineer and figure out how much we need to start putting back to make that goal a reality by the time we want to. Okay? Because again, retirement is a number. It's not an age. It's a number. Okay? So what's the rule of 72, and how does that help us get there? Well, the rule of 72 is kind of like an algorithm. All it does is it tells us how long it's going to take our money to double based on the interest that it's earning. So I want you to imagine, kind of in your mind's eye, imagine you've got three columns. And above the first one, you've got 3%, and then you've got 6%, and then you've got 12%. Okay? So if I were to take $10,000 and I were to put it in something that made 3%, okay? Well, I divide 72 by 3, and that tells me how many years it takes that money to double. So in 24 years, my $10,000 would double to $20,000. And then in another 24 years, I'd have $40,000. Okay? Not enough to retire off of. I could probably pay off my car, but can't retire off of that. The second chunk, let's say maybe, Chip, you were to take your $10,000 and invest it in something that got you 6%, a little bit more aggressive. Okay? In that world, most people think if you double your rate of return, then you're going to double your bottom line. But what happens is you actually get twice as many doubling periods. Albert Einstein said, hey, compound interest is a super powerful force in the universe. So Chip, what actually happens with your $10,000 is in 12 years it doubles to 20, in 24 years it doubles to 40, in 36 years it doubles to 80, and then in 48 years it doubles to $160,000. That's 4 times as much. Well, let's say that the bride's right. Let's say that they take their $10,000 and they invest it into maybe the stock market or mutual funds, ETFs, or something that got them 12% for the sake of this example. Okay, at 12%, what would happen is that money would double every 6 years, because 72 divided by 12 is 6. And what most people don't realize is in that same 48-hour or 48-year window, that $10,000 would grow to about $2.5 million over that same 50-year window. Much bigger difference. Makes it much easier to hit that financial independence number floating above our heads at that type of growth versus less growth. So does that help there?
Yeah. No, and what happens at 1% growth, which is where we've been at for about the last 5 years.
Yeah. That goes back to the inflation conversation we were having earlier, right? Like, are we keeping up the buying power of our dollar, right?
But just,
So
again, this is great information for, financial stress is a huge thing for a lot of us. Cindy and I pushed all our chips on the table about 6 years ago, and that's a bad thing to do when you're at my age, which is a scary thing to do. But, if information is always let's say, the way to dampen down fear. And so this is super good information. If I'm being chased, let's say, by that financial lion, and that financial lion may be debt, that financial lion may be, like you said, I'm not at my number, that financial lion may be, I don't have life insurance. It might be, I can't afford to get, stuff for my kids. It might be a whole bunch of different things, but that financial lion causes you health problems. There is no question about that. So, okay. Well, so tell us a little bit about the theory of decreasing responsibility. So I like that one. Does that mean as I get older, I get to do less? Kind of like the
that's the theory, right? That's why it's a theory. We make no guarantees in this industry, but that's the theory. If things go according to plan, then theoretically the stress comes down. So if you wouldn't mind being my Vanna real quick, a great illustration for this in your mind's eye, you've got Expo written behind you over your right shoulder. So I want you to kind of just imagine an X in your mind, okay? And left to right represents age, younger to older. And then the part of the X that comes down, that declines, that represents your responsibilities over time. To your point, right? We want less stress. And then the part of the X that rises up, okay, that grows, okay, that should represent theoretically your growth, your savings, your investments. So let me just break this down because this kind of explains how your life works. When we're young, okay, I'm sure you know someone, just like we know people who have lots of responsibilities. They're folks in their 30s, they're building their careers, maybe their 40s, whatever, but maybe they have some debt. I'm sure we know someone who has credit card debt, student loans, maybe a car payment, things of that nature. Most folks in America, they have a mortgage. And then there's a good handful of us that have kids, right? And so when you're young, you have all these responsibilities. And so if something were to happen to me, okay, and I didn't have any income protection, because we think of life insurance and we think, oh, nobody wants to think about death, nobody wants to think about life insurance. Well, let's shift how we think about it. Let's think of it as income protection. So if something were to happen to me, Chip, do the bills keep coming in the mailbox?
Yep.
Yeah. Does the mortgage keep coming? Do the kids still want to be fed? Okay.
Yep.
So under those conditions, if something happens to me and God calls me home, right, and Stacy no longer has my income, if we don't have enough income protection, that is not a good scenario for her. That's why income protection is so important when we're younger in life. But what happens is theoretically, here's the theory, right? Theoretically, we pay down our debts, we pay down our mortgage, and theoretically our kids grow up and they leave the nest, right? Sometimes you have boomerang kids, right? But theoretically they leave the nest. So let's say that we're closer to retirement, we have no responsibilities, or we have way fewer responsibilities, and maybe we've been applying the rule of 72, and now maybe we have $1 million or $2 million or $3 million or whatever the case is in the bank. Okay, at that point in life, do we necessarily have a need for income protection like we did back here when we didn't have the savings and we were vulnerable?
Yeah.
Most of the case we don't. So at some point where that X crosses, right? Where that X crosses, that's where you become self-insured. And so when you're at the later stage in life, you're asking yourself, hey, how do I not outlive my income? How do I legally pay less in taxes? How do I leave the legacy that I want? So it's two different types of questions. So that's kind of how the theory of decreasing responsibility works and how it applies to your life. If we're using a metaphor here, think of it like it's the brake in your financial car. The rule of 72 is what gets you to where you want to go. And the theory of decreasing responsibility, God forbid something happens, is what protects you in the short term.
Awesome. Yeah. So I've got a question for you. My wife and I, Cindy and I, have shoved all of our chips into our company. That seems like probably a bad strategy for financial planning and financial situation. But and we're just kind of unique because we're in a unique stage of life. But what do you recommend for people to protect really what they've got? So as they begin to generate, let's say, some income and savings, how do they protect that? How do you, once you're at that, let's say, middle, section of the X, how do you make sure that you're protecting what you have so that you don't need additional life insurance and things like that. So how do you guard your castle?
Okay, so the way you is I'm sure we've all heard the old saying that a wise man keeps good counsel, right? So you get good money managers, you get financial strategists, good financial advisors around you. And so when you start looking at individuals, or you start begin to bring in your counselor, so to speak, you should, one of the questions I would ask is start thinking about kind of like what level of or what standard are they held to. So as we're doing this call right now, okay, Chip and I, we're in the great state of Oklahoma, okay? And if you don't know anything about Oklahoma, what's going to happen here in the next several months is we're going to have tornado season, right? It becomes a spectator sport, right? There's thunder basketball, and then there's tornado watching. I don't want to say it's a close second, but it might be a close second, okay? But my point with that is that we're going to get some thunderstorms that come through here. And odds are we're going to know someone that gets some hail damage, and there's a good chance that they may need a new roof. So they call their roofer. Roofer comes out, inspects the roof. They say, okay, yeah, you need a new roof. They put a new roof up, okay? Well, that roofer has a couple different options. For instance, they could put up a 3-tab shingle, okay, and that would be a suitable recommendation, right? It would get the job done, okay? But if that roofer had a best interest standard that he was held to, okay, then he would probably be more obligated to put on an architectural shingle, right? Architectural shingle, grade 4 shingle, theoretically it's going to last longer, it's going to be impact resistant, it might last 20, 30, 40 years, and that would more than likely be in your and I's best interest versus the 3-tab shingle, just because it's a better quality product, right? So when you start, your responsibilities come down, you start working towards retirement, you start hitting that transition period where you start really developing your strategy. It's, hey, are you working with, what standards is the person you're working with held to? Is that a good way to kind of look at that, kind of reframe that perspective?
Yeah, and I would guess it's kind of seasons of life too. If I'm 25, do I need to be spending, $3,000 a month on health insurance for me and my family, or would that money be better, allocated somewhere else? So it's all about education, really, and understanding that person's unique situation. Would you say?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Can I give you another quick metaphor on that one?
Yeah.
So as we go through this financial journey called life, okay, I want you to imagine a bell curve, all right? And there's an old saying that things that get you to where you are not necessarily entirely the same things that will get you to where you want to go. So in this bell curve, we all go through a growth phase, and then we have a protection phase, which is generally between about 5 to 10 years of retirement. And then we have the spin down phase, right? That's where we get to slow down. And so the strategies that we implement in the growth phase may not be the same strategies that we want to implement to begin to protect some of our money as we get closer to retirement, which may be different than the strategies that we may want to implement once we're in retirement, we're beginning to spin down our life savings.
Yeah, no, that makes a whole lot of sense. I mean, I know just having watched my father and how he retired, he was in a bunch of aggressive investments in his 50s, and then those all shifted to a lot more conservative investments in his 70s. So, but you really help people with all this, right? So if, let's say, my wife and I we weren't sure of our financial situation, and you're going to take into account, our age, our, what we've got versus what we don't have, and kind of what our goals are. But you're going to help us navigate that. Would that be fair?
Yep, that'd be a fair assessment. And to your point, tying health back into this, we can stay in the IQ part of financial planning all day long, what makes mathematical sense, what's going to help you reach your goals. But there's also a certain level of EQ that goes into making the strategy and developing the systems that help you get to where you want to go. Because if you're going to be stressed out about money the whole time, right, we don't weigh that emotional quotient, then what good is it going to do us if you're not going to live to be 60, 70 years old and be able to enjoy your life and enjoy the fruits of your labor? So,
yeah. Oh, that's a very good point. So last question for you. So I seem to be very familiar with this, something called debt stacking, but I'm sure that you will have a different look at debt stacking. But what is debt stacking, and how can I use those ideas, let's say, to benefit me? Or
So
not.
debt stacking is amazing, and debt stacking is this concept that I think most of us are familiar with, where basically you take your excess cash flow and you put it towards one debt, and you pay off that debt. Once that one's paid off, then you stack it towards the next one, and so on and so forth. The hang up that I see sometimes where people kind of get paralyzed in the analysis paralysis is they're like, well, what debt should I pay off first? And there's two schools of thought, and then you have to balance the emotional quotient that we just talked about. So mathematically, generally, not in every case, but generally, you're going to save the most interest and get out of debt fastest if you take the excess cash flow that you have and that you want to put back towards your debt, and you put it towards the debt that has the highest interest payment or the highest interest amount. Then once that one's paid off, you go to the next one and so forth. But with the emotional quotient, like, we're human beings. We want to get a hit of dopamine. We want to feel like we're making progress on something. So sometimes it might make sense to pay off the lowest one or two debts, get those wins, and then use the cash flow that we're putting back towards those to pay off the next one, and so on and so forth. And here's what's fascinating. In all my years of doing this, what most people don't realize is I would say probably 80% of the time that I sit down with people, probably somewhere between 20 to 50% of that financial independence number that they need to have for retirement, 20-50% of that number, or 20 to 50% of their retirement needs are actually hidden in just paying off their debts and reinvesting that money into their retirement.
Interesting. Yeah. And my wife and I would probably fall right square into that category. So if you're interested in hearing more about what Jon has to say, so Jon is with a company called Primerica. Primerica has many, many tools, and you might talk about that in just a second, Jon, the tools that you have access to through Primerica. But Jon will be our featured speaker at our Health Expo that's coming up. So if you go to the Truth in Health website and look for our upcoming expo, or look for one of these signs around town, Jon is going to be our featured speaker and featured presenter at that expo, which is great. We're very excited about that. And it's a tie-in that most people don't really think about, financial health and your physical health itself, but it is so important, our stress and all that. You know, again, if you're being chased by a lion, how are you going to have good health, right? So Jon helps get the lion off your back. But go ahead, Jon, and give us a little bit more information about the tool set that you have available to you. And you're obviously a smart guy. You can really help people, but you've got a big tool set behind you, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm a smart guy. I just married well, so behind every great man is a better woman, right? So, a secret to all the men watching this or listening to this, if you're not familiar with the wife tax so well, maybe we should do another segment on that. But as far as the tools behind me go, everything starts with an analysis. And so, well, I should say it starts with education and then an analysis, right? Like, having knowledge is good, but if we don't apply that knowledge, do we really get anywhere, right? So we have to apply that. So what we do is we do a fully comprehensive, customized analysis for families. We find out, where are they at? Where do they want to be? It's kind of like a financial GPS to, bridge the two. What's the fastest way to get from point A to point B? And so depending upon what a family's needs are, that will kind of dictate how we put together the strategy. That's the super simple 30,000 foot look. So.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you, Jon. Thank you for coming on today. And thank you for giving us a little bit of your time to help people understand what you can do, how you can help them, and how you can improve their health. And again, this isn't something that's just top of mind, my financial health and my health, but it should be, and it needs to be. So you're going to be at the expo. We're very excited to have you. Is there anything that you're going to bring out to the expo that we're going to entice people with, that you're going to be talking about specially, or is it mainly going to be just the stuff that we've talked about today?
I would say the best teaser I can give for that would be show up and see. There will be some unique things there. Show up and see.
So if you know Jon, or you've ever heard Jon speak, or you've ever heard Jon educate, that will be a promise. So there'll be some unique and interesting things that he will do at the expo to keep us all entertained, but also educate us. So Jon, thank you again for coming on today, and we look forward to seeing you at the expo.
That'll work. We'll see you guys there.
If financial stress is something your family is navigating right now, you don't have to figure it out alone. Come meet Jon Roth at the Clean Living Expo on April 24th and take the first step toward clarity and stability. Because when financial stress goes down, everything else gets better.